The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at norcalmlkfoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizal, dear friend, great collaborator. I'm grateful to be here, honored to be invited to spend this occasion with you. And not just today, but this entire weekend, and commemorating one of the most important figures in the history of advancing equity and justice, and elevating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's been an honor to be a friend and collaborator with you, Dr. Rizal, and also getting to know others with whom you've been working. To all of you who are here today, friends, neighbors, those who are co-stakeholders in a quest for justice and love in the vision that King elevated and that Thurman advanced. It is a wonderful opportunity for us to be together in this sanctuary. We are not merely in any building on Market Street. We are standing on what Howard Thurman termed the growing edge of a dream. When Howard Thurman and his co-worker, Dr. Alfred Fisk, opened these doors in 1944, they were not just starting a church. They were conducting what they called a holy experiment in a world defined by the mores of racial apartheid, segregation. And it was in that context that they dared to suggest that the Spirit of God in the human soul is more real, more powerful, more efficacious than the walls that had been built to divide people. And it's easy for us, hopefully, I think, to take for granted the ability to do what we do every day in this society. We come and go, we congregate not just in this sanctuary, but in cafes, hotels, restaurants, buses, in our co-working spaces, in the office, in our professional lives, in our personal lives. What they were doing, however, in the early 20th century seemed not just edgy, but unlikely in its ability to succeed. But they had a very audacious dream, a very daring vision that exceeded the bounds of possibility for most people if you had asked them to gauge what they were attempting. They were dreaming big, and they built something in the spirit of boldness that we are able to benefit from every day. And so what I want to reflect on is that legacy of dreaming big and building boldly that I think we should pursue and be inspired, not just by the vision that they held, but by the act that they performed. That was to call into being, to dare to dream something that might have seemed unlikely, that might have seemed even unrealistic. But they did it boldly, and they built something that was profound. It's fitting that we gather here to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because we know that King carried with him, both in his thinking and his thoughts, and in the physical form of a copy of that book, Jesus and the Disinherited, as he undertook his activism during the Montgomery bus boycott. He not only read Thurman, he connected with at a spiritual level, and he lived and breathed the atmosphere of this fellowship that is Thurman's legacy. King understood what Thurman taught, that before you can change a system, you have to recognize the divine spark that resides within every individual. Because this was part of Thurman's mysticism, looking beyond the material realities, the everyday structures, in order to place a confidence in something that might not be visible to the physical eye, but that could be discerned in another level. And that spark of the human spirit was something that we believe could not be distinguished, and that no systems of injustice could negate or dim. Our theme over this weekend is liberty, justice, and the beloved community. And we often speak of liberty in terms that can easily make it seem like an individual prize. The right to privacy, to be left alone, to come and go as we please, to seek our own fortune. And it's true that this plays out for individuals, but in the philosophy of King and the theology of Thurman, liberty was something even more expensive. True liberty is the freedom to pursue one's dreams, and it's also anchored in a radical realization that we cannot pursue those dreams alone, that we have to do it in community with others. And so when I think about the legacy of King and Thurman, I become increasingly awed and inspired by the scale of what they imagined, of what they dreamed. And I think we should be inspired by the scale of their imagination, by its boldness. And I'll give you this example. I was talking to someone who knew Elon Musk decades ago in the 1990s. Now this is 2025 and I was having this conversation. He said in the 1990s, Elon Musk said he wanted to do one thing and one thing only. He wanted to go to Mars. Yes, it's the 1990s, and that's what exactly what people do when they heard this. They think this guy's crazy. He's going to go to Mars. First of all, Mars is far away. You died before you got there, and even if you made it there, you died when you got there. If you actually made it there, because all the conditions have to be undertaken. But every business that he built, from a digital version of the Yellow Pages to PayPal to Tesla to SpaceX, all of that was only a means for him to do one thing: getting to Mars. He said he didn't care about cars, he didn't care about PayPal, he didn't care about rocket ships. It was colonizing Mars. Now, in his own political imaginations, Musk has come to represent, in many ways, the antithesis of what King was fighting for and what Thurman was fighting for, and the attacks that we've seen on things that have been focused on creating democratic possibilities for everyone. But I say that to say this: we should not be out-dreamed by anything.
I get a moment because that's like major. That's the thing.
It is profound. When we think about the challenges that we face and the solutions that we think we are capable of creating, how boldly are we willing to dream? First of all, it's an act of imagination. So if I ask you to imagine you have any amount of money that you would want to have, I hope that you wouldn't say, well, I'd like $1 million. Because I just read that NVIDIA is worth $5 trillion. So we have multi-trillion-dollar companies. So I hope that you would at least say, not just billions, but maybe quintillions. I mean, maybe you should first Google the word for the biggest scale of what comes out to quintillion, for the biggest number that we can come up with, and imagine that. If you're just imagining, if you're dreaming, you're not really limited by anything except your own level of boldness. How fiercely are you willing to dream? It's dreaming. It's imagination. And if someone could imagine 30 years ago in a serious way that they wanted to colonize Mars, what should we be imagining when we're thinking about the kind of legacy that King and Thurman established in creating beloved community, in establishing liberty, in creating social justice as something that would become a lived reality? it is important for us not to be out-dreamed, not to be out-imagined by anyone, and to be unbridled, to be unleashed in our boldness to bring into vision that which we would like to achieve. Before we even start to think about what may be possible, think about what you can imagine, what you can dream. The challenges that we face are strident. They are sprawling. You think of the young people today in the Western Addition or the Tenderloin, or looking at the gleaming towers of the financial district here in San Francisco, or LA, or New York City, or in any London, Paris, Beijing, any of these world cities. They have the liberty to dream of being a scientist, poet, a tech founder, etc. But if our cities and if our nation's systems for living, if our housing markets, if our schools, if our transit systems, if our educational institutions are structured to minimize participation, then that liberty that people might pursue can easily appear as a cruel mirage that is always on the horizon but never actually within reach. We have to make liberty more than the absence of inhibition, more than the absence of change. It has to be the presence of opportunity. It has to be the freedom to become what you ought to be so that you can become that. When we think about justice as an embedded trait of the soul, this is how King and Thurman understood it. It was inherent to the natural and what they would see as articulated as a sacred condition of all people. We can understand that justice should not be seen merely as a cold legalistic weighing of scales, but rather as something that everyone has inherited to who they are. We live in a moment here in 2026 where the word is often weaponized, even attacked. We've seen a time when principles of inclusion, for example, the differences, the diversity of peoples that was celebrated, that was a reason for the founding of this very congregation, have become attacked as scandalous ideas, as threatening pursuits. And we hear talk of retribution and revenge in our national discourse. We see a landscape throughout our nation and our world where the rights of people who are most vulnerable, what Thurman called the disinherited, our immigrant neighbors, our unhoused sisters and brothers, civilians who are being killed in unjust wars, peaceful protesters, speaking truth to power, who are now being attacked by the state, are treated as negotiable chips in a political game or even as an affront to national security. But justice is born of the fact that we all need each other. Every one of us. It's the social manifestation of love. And when we speak of justice, whether it's here in San Francisco or DC or Chicago or Paris or London, we must speak of a reality where any person, a nurse, a teacher, a bus driver can actually afford to live in the neighborhoods where they serve. And justice has to become realized as that recognition that the divine spark in everyone, regardless of where they are and who they are, is the same spark that resides in each of us. Whether they were unhoused, whether they are a billionaire, whether they are a celebrity or someone who is unknown. Speaking truth to power in this context means that we have to refuse the two-tiered structures of our world. We are increasingly, people are becoming subject to the crisis of unaffordability. And it means acknowledging something that was very, very central to King's legacy, that our economic systems are interconnected in ways that exploit the many for the luxury of the few. King warned that a nation that spends more on military defense, or today we might say even beyond military spending, the fortification of wealth, or the money that's spent to preserve wealth, outweighs that we spend on programs of social uplift. And for him, he said, this is an indication of a spiritual death. We have to bring to life that justice so that it can be realized. The inescapable network of mutuality was central to King's legacy as well. What he called a single garment of destiny was something that we have to incorporate into our understanding of what we should be building, of whom we should be fighting for. If there is a threat to the rights of LGBTQ communities in one state or any part of the world, it is a threat to the fabric of freedom everywhere, among anyone. And we see this mutuality in our ecology, whether we're looking at the housing crisis or the status of immigrants or peoples who are being targeted based on whatever that issue might be or the category of the threat might be. As we face these mounting challenges of the environment, for example, and realize that the air we breathe into our bodies doesn't care about zip codes, it doesn't care about which region of the earth carbon emissions are coming from. It's one planet with one ozone layer, with one set of oceans that ultimately affect all of us. And our survival depends on our ability to see that injustice anywhere, as King said, threatens justice everywhere. The beloved community is what King and Thurman were building, and it's that product that was the result of the vision and the dream. And it brings me to consider what we should be building if we're going to dream big and build boldly. The beloved community is a place where respect, justice, and love transcend the labels that we use to divide ourselves. And it's a community where we just don't tolerate differences, but we celebrate them, where we embrace them, because we can see those as essential threads in a tapestry that constitute who we are, where we will have achieved a truly inclusive world where everyone can thrive. So here at this congregation at Fellowship Church, by living out the vision of Thurman's legacy, you have modeled this for over 80 years, and you've shown that people who are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheists can sit together at the same table because they recognize a shared humanity that transcends whatever particularities or differences they occupy. In other words, the beloved community is not some utopian, impossible idea. It is something that is a practical necessity. When we envision justice, when we envision the beloved community, it's essential for us to be bold because the challenges are so great. We have to figure this out. We have to create the structures and systems that will produce the outcomes of justice that will allow us to thrive. So I want to leave you with these thoughts. The challenges of 2026 are real. The technological innovation that we are witnessing is accelerating more quickly than anything we've seen before. If you try to keep up with all the changes that are happening in AI and adjacent digital technologies, in biotech and financial technologies, those changes are occurring faster than you can mark them. And as we go through this year, we will see things happen even more quickly. We will see the scale of wealth that is created from these technologies expand even faster. And we will see the looming inequality that continues to be exacerbated. We are people of what Thurman called the growing edge, and what he meant by that was the kind of edge that is created by a wound. If you think of a plant that gets cut, and then the edge where that cut happens begins to grow. It begins to expand to repair what happened, but also build beyond it. And that growing edge was a term that he used to describe that place where life is pushing through the soil, even in the dead of winter, moving beyond the injury that occurred in order to create something, not only to replace what was before, but to move beyond what was before. Our constructive way forward will be found in our ability to not just be inspired by the vision of King and Thurman, but to be inspired by their boldness, by their courage, by their unbridled imagination. If they could come up with the strategies and the imperatives to do what most people around them considered impossible. What highly intelligent, thoughtful people would say was very unlikely, or you might not want to pursue that because it's probably not going to work. Why don't you do something realistic? What they did was driven by the ability to be attuned to something that was not in front of them. They were visionary. And when you're being visionary, what you're looking at, what you are perceiving, is not the reality that's in front of you. You have to see what's not there. You have to imagine what is not currently possible. And if someone from the 1990s could start multiple companies for one reason, because they wanted to colonize Mars, that sounds preposterous. You at least have to recognize, yeah, but that's an exercise of imagination. And that was the scale of imagination that King and Thurman brought. This was the first congregation in the country to be intentionally interracial and bring people together across those differences. And they created that sanctuary in the context of what seemed like improbability and impossibility. And they were so successful at it that we live our lives every day walking into a store, going into a hospital, purchasing a cup of coffee, coming to a congregation, and it doesn't even feel like a big deal. Because they transformed improbability into something that is now mundane, that is something that we can take for granted. And so the quest for us is this: what are the improbable, seemingly impossible outcomes that we should be dreaming, that we should be imagining? How can we be bolder in what we want to envision as a possibility? And when we are attuned to creating that vision, we will be able to build boldly the beloved community that Thurman and King were so deeply committed to. We should never be intimidated by the scale of our challenges. When we see a big problem, we should be inspired to unleash our imagination. We should never retreat into trying to figure out what's realistic. We should unleash our ability to create a new reality, because what we're seeing cannot contain what we should imagine. Let us dream big, build boldly, inhabit the vision, establish the beloved community. As we hear more and more negativity and crises that are emerging in our world, let's not shrink into timidity. Let's not get rational and realistic. Let's get visionary. Let's be dreamers, dream big, and let us build boldly something that together will be a different reality to transform our world. That is the legacy that I think we should be inspired by when we consider the gift, the vision, and the life that King and Thurman embodied in their lives.
Amen.